Can that light, can you, I don't know, that can be adjusted a little bit. It's in these people's face, but the light is good on me.
Leon, is this in your eye at all?
But now that's shining there and making that too dim. So maybe you want to just turn the volume, the amplitude. There's two knobs on the back. Or else we could go higher and shine it down on me perhaps, or. Just want to take. I wonder if this is actually. No, I got it. What happens if you move that a little bit forward to the stage and now just a little bit more at me? That's still, I think, not, I think that's still good there, but it's not as good. Turn the amplitude, the luminosity down a bit more.
Very dim then.
All right, up again a little bit. I don't know if it's doing anything to that or not. How's that for you over there? Is it still in your eyes? Put it a little bit more on me. See where we can get it to. No, just aim it more. How about now?
Right. I gotta say. I can make it maybe some of my eyes.
It's on you?
It just I'm getting like is it kind of up to your eyes?
Yeah, it's like a weird angle.
So make it a little bit dimmer again and we'll see if that works.
It's already almost at its low.
Yeah, but that's okay. It's actually it's lighting me up enough.
Got it. Are you good?
Yeah.
Great, thanks for letting us know.
All right, I'm gonna go live. Oh, and we need the microphone thingy.
Yeah, do you know which episode it is? Yeah, which number is it?
And I need my transmitter mic. Oh, I already have it here. And is this all on already, or?
Yeah, that's set up.
And we need to set that up in Zoom because last time that was our problem there.
There.
So I'm going here to audio settings and
20 ounce bottle of whipped cream.
HDMI USB capture.
Yep.
Same as system HDMI. Oh, there's two of them. I don't know which.
Either one works.
Testing.
Are you live right now?
Testing. I think so. This is a test. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. So that's what so we are on YouTube or not yet?
Yeah, you're live.
All right, so everybody on YouTube, just be patient. We're just in final stages of setting this craziness up. And I'm going to just be here for a minute while we get things set up. So be patient, please. So everybody on YouTube, just be patient.
I'll mute that in a moment. That's my computer. If you want to hit the mute button, it's in the left corner. Thank you. Do you want it on this side or next to you?
Probably over here.
Tighten this up.
I'll probably want that to be extended, but I got these controls. Where's the, so let's just make sure the microphone works.
I was just wanting Nat to tell us which number do we need? 14? Or
All right.
Fantastic.
Do we think we're on? No, not yet. Do I have an on button here? No. Hello, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 3.5, 3 3/4. Pi 3.141. Testing, nothing. There's no power thing on this. So, and for those of you online, just be patient. We're just finalizing, getting set up. This weird thing here is my microphone. And all right, you should be hearing me. I'm going to temporarily share my screen. And
Oh, sounds like it.
testing, less volume, less volume, less volume. All right, I think that's still pretty. Can we turn the volume down a little bit? All right, all right. I'm dangerous when I get a microphone near me, although not as dangerous as some politicians who might remain unnamed. Okay, so what am I doing here? I think is that good for you folks? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to set the microphone here, and I'm now going to try to see if we can get a chart up. And all right. Okay, so we're still waiting because we only seem to have one participant, and I'm not sure if there's something wrong here on Zoom. On YouTube. Can you go to YouTube, Sam, and see if you can join?
I'm in it right now, and you have 113 people watching.
Well, there you go. It's a good thing that majority doesn't always rule, because we're here, we rule. It's that old thing is showing up is the, I think Tom Petty's saying waiting is the hardest part, but sometimes showing up is the hardest part. After that, waiting is easy. Okay, I'm going to unshare my screen here for a moment. If I can figure out where that is, there we go. And stop the share. I can't say stop the share without thinking stop the steal, but that just tells you where I'm at, like it or not. Okay. Hi. So what the hell are you all doing here? Hey, Sam, I'm wondering, can you take the camera? Oh, no, you probably can't take it off there because you can't figure out how to get it back on. But I'm wondering if you could just do a pan of the room. Yeah.
Oh, well, one angle of it.
All right, we'll see what we got going here. Can we go all the way around? Yeah, probably. But no, you got the ceiling. You got to lower it. It's a good ceiling. All right. Well, you get the idea. Yeah, it is a good ceiling. Oh, and there I am again. Okay. Well, that was fun. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Astrology Night at SoulFood Coffeehouse in scenic downtown Redmond, Washington, the bicycle capital of the Northwest. I bet you didn't know that unless you've ever driven down Rose Hill and seen the silly sign as you come into Seattle, or you come into Redmond. How many of you are here for a first time? Just to get, and how did you hear about it? Just say out loud.
Astrology Hub.
Astrology Hub.
Studying astrology.
How'd you know about tonight, though?
YouTube.
All right, you guys are,
You're a good spokesperson.
you guys are hopeless, or maybe I am. Actually, some of you may have heard me say this before, but I think being hopeless is better than being hopeful sometimes. My Buddhist friends tell me that hope is actually troublesome because it takes responsibility and places it into the future. It's a good reason not to do anything. I hope things will get better. And I'm serious. It's an interesting way of looking at it because, because sometimes we just think that, well, the only thing I can do is have hope. But that's kind of a last resort. And I think sometimes it's easy to be hopeful when instead we should be aware of the present and intentional about what it is we're doing in the present. Just an aside. So before I start, also, let me get a sense of puberty. Second puberty. Let me get a sense of where you are at. Just say, like how many people here like do charts, whether you do it professionally or not. Just how many people can look at a chart and go, oh yeah, that's a chart. Maybe you don't feel confident. How many people barely know their sun sign? All right, that's all I need to know. My favorite audience when I do the retreats that I do. I have one, as you may know, coming up in India. So I won't be here on New Year's Eve, but then again, probably neither will you. I'll be in India leading a retreat for about 40 plus people. That's 10 days long. And there will be people in there who are absolute beginners and people who are professionals. And I love teaching to that kind of mixed audience because I can't just get lost in technical jargon or I lose the beginners. And I have to be at least sensible enough, and maybe pithy enough is the right word, that I don't, bore the people who, could probably be up here talking themselves. But anyone who's, studied astrology for a long time knows that it never ends. I mean, I have more saved YouTube lectures and on astrology by cohorts and friends and associates and even people I don't know about astrology because there's never an end. One is always a student in astrology because it's a never-ending, widening, and growing thing. And the fact is that we astrologers are beneficiaries of what my old astrology buddy, astrology partner, Jeff Jower. How many people here knew Jeff or just, wow, so you guys are relatively new. Jeff and I started doing Astrology Night, I think about 16 years ago here. And he was my astrology buddy partner in crime in a major astrology web venture that we undertook together, and we taught around the world. And Jeff used to say that we astrologers are beneficiaries. He passed away from lung cancer about 7 years ago now, almost 8 years ago. I can't believe that time has passed so quickly. But it's hard to get on this stage without seeing Jeff right there because we did it for, 10 years together, about 9 years together. Jeff used to say that we astrologers benefit from the Astrologers Full Employment Act. And someone would always go, what's that? And he'd say, oh, the planets, they keep going round. So whoever it was or whatever it was that gave the law of the planets having to continue around on their orbits around the sun, keep us in business, but it also keeps us learning. Because although there are cycles that are repetitive, like our month cycle, we have a calendar that is really based on the sun, so it forgets that there's really closer to 13 moon cycles a year, but we round it off to 12 months. And the word month is really a month. And but those cycles we're very familiar with. But the slower, longer term cycles like Uranus cycle, which is 84 years, or Pluto, which is which is 248 years, it gets a little bit trickier because these slower moving planets that are being interacted with by the faster moving planets mean that every new moment is unique. This moment, whatever moment it is, never happened before. Because there are so many variables that the interaction is always different. For example, the planet Pluto has not been in its movement through the sign of Aquarius since the founding of the United States of America. The Declaration of Independence, which many people call the birthday of the United States, and countries and cities have birth dates just like humans do. But we humans know that when the sun returns to where it was when we were born, we celebrate it because there's a moment of intention that is allowed. The intention is obvious when you realize that the most enduring custom around one's birthday is you light a candle, you make a wish, you blow it out, and that's your birthday wish. And in astrology, whenever a planet returns to where it was at your birth, that's like a birth moment recognition where the universe allows a special imprinting to occur that's like learning, that's more important than other moments. And so every year on our birthday, we perform an ancient ritual, which is basically creating an intention, lighting a candle or a fire to focus that attention, but intentions don't manifest, or they can't manifest until you release them. And so that's when you blow out the candle and you release it. Now, most people in the United States would stop having that custom in their home if they knew it was a witchy, kind of a thing to do. But it certainly is. And so from that standpoint, we take moments when planets return to where they were when we were born, like our birthday every year. But many of you who have studied astrology know that other planets, when they return, are, if not as important, maybe way more important, like the planet Saturn, which astrologically is the planet of what we think is reality, this three-dimensional play of cause and effect events that has gravity and interaction. Saturn is about the real, quote unquote, real world. But of course, Albert Einstein said that reality is just an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. So the point is that Saturn takes about 29 and a half years to go around the sun once. Like the moon takes about 29 days to go around the earth once. There's a resonance. But the thing is that when Saturn returns to where it was when we were born, it's like our first real astrological birthday. And we only get one or two, or some people maybe three of them in their lifetime, because they happen around 29, around 58, and around 82, 83, somewhere in there. And so I think that's right, 30, 60, 90, around 84, 85, actually. And so the point is that when we individuals go through our 28, 29, 30, year birthdays, most of us, if we're old enough, if we're in our 30s, we can look back at that 28, 29, 30, 31 period and go, holy crap, did my life change? And here's why. I got married, I got divorced, I bought a home, I sold a home, I changed jobs, I changed careers, I went back to school, I quit school, I killed my parents. I mean, something big, or I, like many people who don't get their maturation act together, they die. It's the rock and roll, 28, club, the 27, but that whole process starts then. And the point here that I'm making is that every moment is unique, and that we live in a moment that is incredibly, especially comparatively more unique than even most unique moments. And when I say this moment, I'm really referring to the end of the roaring 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. And one of the things that makes this moment so unique, and again, I say this moment as Friday night, October 6th at about nearly 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on planet Earth, because we live in a very chronocentric universe where everything is based upon time. But of course, my time is not someone else's time who's watching this from Norway or Australia or even from Cleveland, Ohio. Their time is different. Where was I going with all this? Okay, this time, whether we're talking about a 50, 60, 70 year period of time or just this week, both of them are crazy unique compared to other periods of time. This period of time on the large scheme of things, going back to the mid-1960s, that I can see looking around here, some of you were there. I was there. Ram Dass says if you remember it, you weren't there, but I remember it and I was there, just for the record. But then there were people who were born in the 60s, and the 60s lived through them rather than them living through the 60s. And then there were people, probably many of us here, who were born after the 60s, but know that something happened back then. Just as when I grew up in the 50s, we looked back at the 1920s and knew something happened back then, or the more recent World War II that I was born well after, but still it was recent history. The reason why we're talking about this is part of this moment, meaning now October, so we're narrowed down from 60 or 70 years, has to do with the planet Pluto, which is creating United States of America's first Pluto birthday. Remember, we have a sun birthday, a solar birthday once a year. We have a lunar birthday 13 times a year. We have a Jupiter birthday once every 12 years. We have a Saturn birthday right around turning 30. It's the over 30, under 30. Don't trust anyone over 30 if you're under 30. And if you're over 30, if you have friends who, even if they're smart, precocious, mature, there's still something different about them because they haven't had that first Saturn return and taken their role as adult prior to that. Again, even if you think you're cool and mature and ahead of the curve, until you reach the early 30s, you're not astrologically mature. There's no judgment on that, by the way, because I know people who are in their teens or 20s in many ways act and seem way more mature than people that I know who are my age. So just to be clear, there's no ageism going on here. So when the United States was born in 1776, the planet Pluto, which is the farthest out of the planets we astrologers all use. There are other things. NASA tracks about 500,000 things going around the sun, as crazy as that might sound to us. And perhaps they all have importance, which is why there will always be mystery and unknown. But Pluto is the lord of the underworld. Pluto is Latin for Hades, which is Greek for hell. And here, and some of you have heard me do this before, I have to do what I call my brief Christian disclaimer. I'm not disclaiming Christianity. I'm just disclaiming the accuracy of their perception of hell, because hell is not a place where we go to get punished. Hell, in the words of William Blake, is a place so beautiful it would torment an angel to insanity. In the Eastern traditions, what we call hell, the place to go, the place where you get doomed for eternity and get punished, in some of the Eastern traditions is one of many levels of a wider concept of hell, which really has to do with everything that's not here, not now. Now, what does that mean? It means everything that's hidden. It means everything that's under the ground. To the ancients, wealth was under the ground. I mean, you could have money, but you weren't ridiculously rich unless you owned things under the ground, meaning gold, silver, copper, tin, diamonds, and so on. That was the source of real wealth. And interestingly, plutonic wealth today may not be stored under the ground, but it's still, like things under the ground, hidden. This isn't rich. This isn't rule by the rich. This is rule by, when I say this, I'm talking now about the government we call plutocracy, which is technically a government that is ruled by or managed or run by the very wealthy. But it's not the wealthy. It's the hidden, very, 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 very ultra crazy wealthy that you don't even know about. That basically the authority, that Saturn, the real world, is responsible to this hidden realm. Now, psychologically, Pluto also represents everything that's hidden to our awareness, i.e. our unconscious. And the deep dive into plutonic realms in the 20th century, beginning with Freud and Jung and this kind of psychology that enabled us to go into the hidden realms of the mind, is all plutonic. And it's all about bringing these hidden things out into the open, because things, when they're plutonic, when they're hidden, have power over us. And when they're in the open, they might be frightening, but they don't have the same power over us because we get to work with them. That's why we do therapy. Some people refer to this as shadow work. So bringing this back to now, it was during the time of the late 1770s, 80s, and 90s, that Pluto moved from the sign of Capricorn, where it had been for a couple of decades, into the sign of Aquarius. Aquarius is the sign of the future, of freedom, of collective consciousness, but how people kind of band together to create community and collectivity. And when Pluto moved into Aquarius, we had social movements, not just in the United States, but around the world, that created the first nations that were not beheld by, where power was not held by a royal family. It was not genetically given. There was this concept of rule by ourselves, democracy. And the United States, the American Revolution was such an example. But in that same period of time, we also had the French Revolution. And this was also Pluto in Aquarius. So that period of time, from this crazy period when people revolted or rebelled against the Saturnian power structures and the hidden wealth and genetics behind that in both the United States and the American Revolution and the French Revolution, we now have reached a point in history where last year, 2022, Pluto, actually, it was the beginning of this year. It was in March of this year, 2023, I'm sorry, where Pluto, for the first time in over 225 years, was going around in a full circle and tipped into Aquarius again. But all the planets that go around the sun, from Earth's point of view, because the Earth is moving around too, have cycles where they look like they're going backwards. They don't really go backwards. It's called retrograde. Most of you know that when Mercury is retrograde, you're not supposed to do anything, which is kind of stupid, but we're not having that conversation until the next time Mercury goes retrograde. And I know many of you have heard me do a deep dive on that concept. The planets don't move backwards, but they look like they do. So in March of 2023, Pluto touched into Aquarius and brought inklings of what might be over the next 20 years as it moves through the sign. I mean, the sun moves through a sign in a month. The moon moves through a sign in a couple of days. But Pluto takes 20 to 30, 40 years to go through a sign, depending on how fast or slow it's moving based upon its elliptical orbit. So in March of this year, Pluto touched into Aquarius. And then it did what astrologers called its station, meaning it looks like it stopped moving forward. And then it went into reverse. It didn't really, it just is an optical illusion. And then by May, after just 2 months in Aquarius, it backed into Capricorn. All right, so what does Pluto do astrologically? Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. It's like being visited by the Grim Reaper. Pluto basically takes out whatever shit you don't need, whether you know you don't need it or not. Pluto, many of my astrology friends call Pluto Roto-Rooter. You know, it doesn't care what you got in the pipes, it's going to clean them out. And there's really, you know that Star Trek saying, resistance is futile, we shall assimilate you. Well, Pluto, resistance is futile. And in fact, the more you resist, the more difficult the Pluto energy or transit might be at different times in our lives. And I think of Pluto as the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. It's not like the leaves falling off the trees every year, because they do that in a cycle that's a yearly cycle. But the caterpillar has no way of imagining or envisioning a butterfly, and yet it goes through this apparent death rebirth process where everything about its caterpillarness dies. And because it is in a natural state, it just does this, and everything about it melts, disintegrates, and somehow magically reforms on a higher level of evolution and becomes a magical butterfly. And it's said that the caterpillar is simply the butterfly's way of making another butterfly. So here's the exciting news. As crazy, crappy, sucky as things seem right now on planet Earth, we are not dying. We are caterpillars. And the advantage that let me say it the other way around. The disadvantage that we have compared to a caterpillar is that we have egos. Caterpillars apparently do not. And it's the ego's job to ensure personal survival. And so if the caterpillar had an ego, it would say, when the chrysalis began hardening around it, and it would fight it. It would go, I ain't getting into that. I'm not letting myself solidify. I'm not going to do this because that's my death. But, and if it had an ego, its ego would say, hell no, double entendre intended, hell no, I won't go. When we approach anything that feels like death, and let me be clear here, I don't mean physical death, except they're the same, except they're not, because one involves leaving the body completely and on a one-way street. But any sort of giving up of something that's important is a form of death. Even intense sexuality, which the French call the orgasm being a little death. There's a sense of where the ego is not in control, and there's a higher merge that occurs. And so Pluto's job is to disintegrate everything that we think is real. If it's no longer needed, it takes it away. It brings it into the hell realms where we can't recover it, but then something happens because there is no death without rebirth. That this is a law of the universe. So here we are in October of 2023 with Pluto having touched into Aquarius and stirring up a lot of potential things about the future. I noticed that when Pluto moved into Aquarius back in March, almost overnight, artificial intelligence was on everyone's mind. Chat GPT, AI this, AI that. In January, February of this year, all that development was going on, but it was all hidden. And then all of a sudden, and it was everywhere. And we can imagine that there are things that as Pluto moves through Aquarius, because Pluto basically deconstructs, reconstructs. Aquarius is about the future. It's about technology. It's about how the larger scheme of things connect in a network. Capricorn, where Pluto is coming from, having been there for the last 18 years, Capricorn is not about these intellectual, conceptual, technological advances. Capricorn is about the real, the Saturn things that have substance. Roads, bridges, buildings, government, laws, banks, monetary systems. And as Pluto moved through Capricorn, it basically, I don't want to say devastated all of that, but it basically took the fundamental things that were the structures of what we thought would be never changing, and it basically changed them. I mean, little things like in the United States, like the Constitution, like our form of government, but also the fact that, that the infrastructure bill with billions of dollars being devoted to creating, new structures that are Capricornian, that have solidity, including high-speed internet in the United States and so on. But also banking systems. When Pluto moved into Aquarius back in 2008, give or take a little bit, that was when we had the real estate crash. And just before Pluto, as it entered into Aquarius, just a few, back at the beginning of this year, we had banks failing that were related to technology. So that was Pluto in Capricorn. As Pluto moved backwards into Capricorn over these past few months, May, June, July, August, September. Now Pluto is stationing in its retrograde, and it will begin to move forward, but it hardly moves the entire month of October. In fact, all the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, they're all in that state of moving from direct to retrograde or retrograde to direct. And like a pendulum, in order to change directions, it has to slow down and stop. And so we are in a few months of period where the outer planets that hold the meaning of long-term change are kind of frozen in time, including Pluto, which is coming back to completing the cycle and beginning its first year of life on a 248-year Pluto cycle. And so it's not surprising to astrologers that the United States, regardless of whether you're politically left, right, indifferent, upside down, I don't care, regardless of whether you're what gender you either were born with or happen to wear, regardless of what race or color or ethnicity, it doesn't matter. Pluto is basically creating a meltdown of the United States because it's having its Pluto return, and it's like a metal that melts down and then it solidifies. And that's what's going to happen in the years ahead. How that's going to solidify, I don't know. But I'm not going to hope that someone else does something to make it happen. I'm going to, like I would encourage everyone, to be involved to whatever extent you can, because these are extraordinary times. It was Pluto's connection with the planet Uranus, which is the planet, Uranus is the planet of shock, surprise, revolution, rebellion, irrepressible energy, explosion. Uranus is like the explosion of dynamite or of even of an atom bomb. It's lightning striking. It releases tension. Well, Uranus lines up with Pluto about every other century. And sometimes when Pluto's moving slower, Uranus catches up to it more quickly. These outer planet cycles are not as regular as we would like. But Uranus, the planet of shock, surprise, explosion, awakening, sometimes called Uranus the Awakener, caught up and lined up with Pluto in the mid-1960s. That's what every astrologer knows about the 60s, is that it was a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. The one that happened prior to that I think, was in 1850, which is the year the New York Times was established. In fact, Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks, was established that year. It was also the year the state of California was incorporated. There are other things from that period of time. But as you follow that Uranus-Pluto cycle back, and back, all the way back to even 1455, when they aligned, that was the year that Gutenberg printed the Bible, changed everything. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that tonight, but that was like culturally one of the most important things that happened, the invention of the printing press, the mechanization of the printed word. Why am I bringing that up? Well, in 1965-66, when Uranus and Pluto aligned, IBM brought to market the first digital computer printing press. Gutenberg thought that there was only one book that would ever be worth printing, and that was the Bible. And by the same token, IBM thought there was only one book that would ever be worth printing on the digital printing press, and that was the printing press of the book of Big Business or Government. No one ever realized, Gutenberg didn't realize that in, let me just think, 1455, 65, 75, 79, 25 years after he printed the Bible, the printing press had found its way to Italy and printed off a few hundred copies of Plato that was translated from the Greek into the Latin by the astrologer Marsilio Ficino. Another deep dive we're not doing tonight. What does this have to do with now? What it has to do with now is that through the 2010s, Uranus and Pluto did another dance. And what it was is like a 1 week after a new moon is a 90-degree angle. That's a half moon. 2 weeks is a fortnight. That's a new moon to a full moon. 3 weeks again is another week. And then 4 weeks is a month. The 90-degree angle in astrology is where the action occurs. The lineup, the conjunction, like your solar return, your birthday, your Saturn return, your Saturn birthday, the United States of America's Pluto return is like its Pluto birthday. That's the beginning of the next cycle, the end of one cycle, the beginning of another. But at the 90-degree angle, that's the first time that cycle comes into conflict with reality. And in the 2010s, Saturn, let me do that again. There's too many planets to keep all their names straight. In the 2010s, Uranus, the planet of revolution, awareness, awakening, shock, surprise, made a 90-degree angle with Pluto. And we had all the things that were important in the 60s that never really went away, but they kind of went plutonic. They became a bit hidden. And all of a sudden they were back in our face with sex, drugs, rock and roll. Well, people marching in the street in the 60s versus Arab Spring and Occupy Wall Street. And I mean, in the 2010, actually that was 2012 at the exact first square. But during that period of time, we had an explosion of gender fluidity and the acknowledgement of gay marriage legally. And in the 1960s at the conjunction, we had an intense wave of feminism with Ms. Magazine, Burn Your Bra, blah, 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 blah. There was and so there was a revisitation of those issues. There was a legalization in the 2010s that began almost overnight of a legalization of personal use of mind-altering substances that, again, was a reflection back to what was going on in the 60s. And financial stuff and the awareness of the revolution against power and ecology. And I know I'm missing important things, but I'm just trying to show how we're coming out of a period of time where those things that were brought up at the beginning of the cycle in the mid-60s were back on us. All right, we've now moved slightly beyond that, but where we are now, personally and collectively, is we're at the beginning of what this entire next 250-year cycle is going to be. And the things that were tied to the past are not working. And because of that, regardless of whether you're right, left, center, or disinterested, the fact of the matter is that people are afraid. we're afraid for different reasons. Some people are afraid that the changes aren't going to occur that they want to occur, and other people are afraid that they are going to occur. And so we have this dance that's going on that we're experiencing as this extreme bifurcation that we've seen, that we are seeing play out in the national political level in the United States, but even over these last few days. And I'm not going to recap nor spend time on this right now, but on my monthly astrology forecast for the month of October, I talk quite a bit about this first week in October and the discomfort and the uncomfortability and the clashes with power, which we're going to explore a moment. And not the clashes with power, but the power clashes within the power structure that will be with us throughout this month. They're not going away. And so before we looked at any charts, I really wanted to just kind of frame this bigger picture, because into that, in October, we have, as I said, the slower moving planets moving slower than ever as a group. Normally, 1 or 2 planets are retrograde at a time, but right now, everything from Jupiter on out is either retrograde or not moving very fast because it's in the process of changing direction. Meanwhile, we're coming out of an extended period where the 2 fastest moving real planets, Mercury and Venus, both were retrograde, and actually were retrograde for a while at the same time. And the thing about that, I just want to get some dates here because I want to replay this really, really quickly. That, first of all, most of us know about Mercury retrograde. It's the fastest moving planet, and when it turns the retrograde, it's the most noticeable, often with some sorts of communication disruptions, or maybe we're not making the progress that we were making. There's nothing wrong with a retrograde or Mercury retrograde, but it's often a time of internal development or kind of getting things right, so that when Mercury then turns direct, away we go. Well, Mercury actually turned direct. It turned retrograde back in August, late August, and it turned direct in mid-September, a couple of weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago. It takes 2 or 3 weeks for Mercury, once it turns direct, to get up to speed, because at first it's moving slowly day by day, and then it gets faster and faster. Right now, Mercury is moving as fast as it goes. It's moving in the sky day by day, nearly twice as fast as the sun. The sun, which appears to move 1 degree a day, that's 360 degrees in a year and 365 days. It's about 1 degree a day. Mercury right now is just traveling. After a couple of months of things not moving very fast on the intellectual communication realm, because Mercury had turned retrograde. Into that, we had Venus, and Mercury turns retrograde 3 times a year. So it's just part of a regular, it's almost like day and night. You know, it's like a cycle that we know because we experience it so often, whether we put language to it or not. Venus, on the other hand, goes retrograde every other year, not quite that, but about every year and a half. And when Venus goes retrograde, it turns retrograde for 40 days and 40 nights. If that sounds biblical, that's a Venus retrograde cycle. So Venus actually turned retrograde back in July, and it turned direct back in September. But here's the thing, when a planet's moving forward and then backward and then forward, there's an area of sky that it covers once, twice, 3 times from Earth's point of view. We astrologers call that area the shadow of the planet, or the retrograde shadow, or as my friend Gemini Brett calls it, retroshade. I love that word. It's a great word. So when a planet moves into that area that's part of its shadow, and then turns direct, and then turns retrograde, it moves into the shadow, turns retrograde, covers up that entire shadow again, and then turns direct. It's not really until it moves out of the shadow that we're really in new territory. So here's the thing to understand, that both Mercury and Venus have turned direct. And Mercury left its shadow, moving into new territory on September 29th. Think October 1st, it's close enough. So October, from an intellectual, perceptual, communication perspective, is new ground. We've not been here before. Other than that, we have Venus, which, although it turned direct back at the beginning of September, it doesn't leave its shadow. I'm going to say it doesn't as if it was in the future, because some people will be watching this on YouTube later on. But Venus leaves, or left, its shadow on October 7th and moves into, it's been in Leo this whole time. It's been in Leo since June. Normally, Venus moves through a sign in about 3 weeks. But Venus has been in Leo for most of June, July, August, September, and into the beginning of October. That's 5 months. And so Venus kind of likes being in Leo because it's about show, it's about pleasure, it's about creativity. But on October 7th, Venus leaves its shadow, and on October 8th, it moves into Virgo, new territory, and not Venus's favorite place to be. We'll talk about that in a moment. Why? But here's the thing. Mars didn't turn retrograde or in this period of time. So Mars has been barreling ahead. Now we have Mercury and Venus that have both come out of their retrogrades, and they're moving really fast. So we have Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Astrologers call these the personal planets. Mercury is how I think, how I talk, how I listen, how I communicate. Venus is what I like and what I don't like. And it's how I frame pleasure, desire, sweet things of value. It's my values. It's money, because money has to do with what we value. And Mars is how we get what we want. It's the boundary creator. It's Mars the warrior, Mars the asserter, Mars the aggressor. So these personal planets having to do with our own lives, the what we like and how we think and how we talk and how we move around physically, Mars, these planets are all moving fast. And they're all moving into new ground. And that's exciting because there's so much going on. And I know in my life and people that I've talked to in the past week, it's like I can't keep up with everything that's going on. But here's the problem. We're not getting anywhere. Why aren't we getting anywhere? Because the outer planets are all either locked still or holding still or moving retrograde or just having turned direct but not moving very fast yet. And then there's Pluto, which actually doesn't move more than 1/12 of a degree for the entire month of October. And it has been retrograde in Capricorn, and it turns direct on October 10th. But it hasn't moved in a week nearly, and it won't move for another week. And so there's something that's holding us. It's like taking your dog and putting its nose towards something that you want it to smell, so either it doesn't do again or so it tracks it or whatever. This is not meant about being mean to any animals or anything, but it's almost like Pluto is doing that to us right now. All the outer planets. There's no. I think of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower. There must be some way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. But there's not. No. Or let me say, yes, there is, but it's not in October, because Pluto will begin moving forward in October, and then Saturn will begin moving forward in November. And by January of next year, all the outer planets except Uranus will be moving forward, and it joins the club in late January or early February. I suppose I should know all these dates, but my brain only holds so many pieces of information at a point in time. Uranus turns direct. January 26th, and end of January, it's where do I go with this? So what I want to say is that if it feels frustrating because you're doing so many things to try to get things moving forward and it's not moving forward the way you want it to, or you look at the global political, economic scene and you see some of the same things happening out there, it's all playing kind of right on schedule. So in my October forecast on YouTube, I always come up with a one line to summarize the month. Some months I do better than other months, and often I'll take a line from a song or a quote or something. And October comes from a Beatles song that if I really had my act together, I would have cued and I would play it for you. But it's a song that was toward the end of their time together. And the song is, and the title for October is, It's All Too Much. It's all too much for me to take. And I'm not saying that anyone should give up or it really is too much, but it's too much. There's a lot going on. And the frustration is that even though things are going on a personal, interactive level of routine, of busyness, of day-to-day activity, of interactions, of relationships, money, all those kinds of things, that on a deeper level, we're still waiting for that stuff to catch up. Okay, got it? Let's take a look at a chart or two. Oh, and then the other thing is that I didn't really mention, because the inner planets are moving so fast this month, that what that means is that they are, in fact, changing signs more often than usual. I have one too many pieces of paper here that, all right, that's not that one, not that one, not that one, and it could be this one, but it's not. So it's not on any of these. It's a piece of paper laying on my desk at home. No, here, this is what I wanted. So there are some months when the only planets, and when I use the word planets, I include the sun and the moon, and I also include Pluto, just to be clear. There are some months when, with the exception of the sun and the moon, no planets change signs. In fact, we had a month like that in September, because the faster moving inner planets were either stationary or retrograde. And so things were just not changing a lot. The sun changes signs every month around the 19th to the 22nd, in that range, which used to be the beginnings of the months when the sun changed signs. And then, of course, the moon changes signs every couple of days. In October, Venus, as I'd already mentioned, moves into Virgo on October 8th. Mercury, which is moving crazy fast, moved from Virgo into Libra on October 4th. But by October 21st, it's breezed through all 30 degrees of Libra, and it moves into Scorpio on October 21st. And then we have Mars, which is also changing signs, moving into Scorpio. And in fact, the sun, which this time of year always moves into Scorpio around the 22nd or 23rd. In fact, Halloween is our Scorpio holiday, where we pay attention to how thin the veil is. And we're aware that there are things on the other side that are invited to come through. And there's way more to that whole mythology of the relationship between pagan holidays and the Christian holidays that appear around the same time. But what this means is that we're moving from a lot of planets being in, where are they? Being in Libra into being in Scorpio. And I'm going to now share my screen, which I think I should be able to do here real easily. Share screen. And I'm going to, and if someone out there in YouTube land can acknowledge that we actually do have a screen on the page, that would be a nice thing. And if you type in the chat room, Sam will look at me and nod that we're okay and I can go on. So what we're looking at here is a chart for October 1st. And for those of you who don't know astrology and have never really looked at a chart, it looks like overwhelming and crazy, and it's really very simple, although finding meaning or creating meaning in this is a lifetime of work. And although there are those people who think I'm at the top of this game, I feel like a beginner when I look at a chart often. But what we're looking at here are the signs of the zodiac, which are not the constellations. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that. The astrological zodiac are 12 signs that begin with Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all the way around 1 to 12. And 0 degrees of Aries is reset every year at the vernal equinox, the first moment of spring in the Northern Hemisphere. And so here we have the signs of the zodiac around the outer edge: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, and so on. And these symbols are all the symbols for where the planets are right now. Well, actually, this is on let's make this at noon on October 1st. So this is noon on October 1st. And these symbols here are for each of the planets. The moon and the sun are in yellow, the moon at 10 degrees of Taurus in 29 minutes. I'm just doing this real quickly so you can just see that there's the information here. There's a lot of information, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. We're just concerned that at the first moment of October, or the first day of October at noon, that the sun was at 8 out of 30 degrees, 8 degrees of Libra. The moon was in Taurus, and here's Mercury back in Virgo. And I said Mercury moves into Libra and then on into Scorpio by the end of the month. We're going to cycle this through the month here in just a moment. Venus still in its shadow, because Venus turned retrograde at 28 degrees of Leo. And as we move this forward, even if we move it just a day at a time, we can see that Venus moves from Leo into Virgo. It was actually late on the 8th, but by the 9th, Venus has moved through into the next sign. So coming back to October 1st, well, we went back to September 30th, penalty, out of bounds. All right, so these are just all the planets where they are. Right now here we can see that Pluto has retrograded back to 27 degrees, 55 minutes. There's 60 minutes in an hour, there's 60 minutes in a degree. So 27 degrees of Capricorn in 55 minutes is really like just about 28 degrees of Capricorn, meaning that it's 2 degrees away from being back in Aquarius. And if I moved this forward a month at a time, which I'm going to do here real quickly, but I want you not to pay attention to the movement of all these planets, which in a month will move considerably. Just watch Pluto. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and in early 2024, Pluto has moved from Capricorn back into Aquarius. If we cycled that a month at a time, it would take 248 years for Pluto to go around once. All right, so here we are again back at the beginning of October with Pluto at 27 degrees and 55 minutes of Capricorn. And if I just move this at 1 day at a time, watch Pluto, and again, don't be distracted by all the other planets. October 1st, actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bump this a month ahead. So you can see from October 1st to November 1st, Pluto has moved 5 minutes of orb. 5 minutes of, it's moved from 27:55 to 27:55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 28 degrees. So Pluto ain't moving is my point. And by next year, Pluto will be back into Aquarius, and all of a sudden it's going to feel like we're in, we've just hit the launch pad and things are really moving quickly into the future. But remember, the things that were set up when Pluto first tipped into Aquarius back in March, April, and early May of this year are going to be 20 years in development. And yes, AI will probably overshadow the internet and the World Wide Web as thing of importance. But another thing that really hit the public awareness in that period of time was the governmental connection and disclosure around ET or ETs, whatever they are, whether they're us in the future or something from another dimension or truly visitors who are here because they have because they're not convinced there's intelligent life on Earth yet. Regardless, you can almost go to the bank, which is probably not a good idea since Pluto is not done with being in Aquarius and we don't know what the banks are going to be doing yet. But conceptually, you can go to the bank with the idea that ETs will be part of our future more so than they are now, whatever that means. I don't have a quick and easy answer there. But if we think that we've been on a technology fast path, we ain't seen nothing yet. The next 20 years, we're going to be very powerful. Now, just looking at this from the beginning of the month to the end of the month, we can see Venus moving from 24 degrees of Leo to almost 24 degrees of Virgo. Venus is cruising now. We can look at Mars moving from 23 degrees of Libra to mid-Scorpio, and look at Mercury also in Scorpio. Look how much Mercury moves in 1 month. Here it's at mid-Scorpio, 16, almost 17 degrees of Scorpio, and here it is back in Virgo. It moves all the way through Libra. But look at the density of planets on the first of the month, the Sun and Mars in Libra. And even if we do this a week at a time, we can see that the Libra density picks up. But by the end of the month, we see the planets escaping Libra and moving into Scorpio. And what does this mean? It means that we're entering a period of no more Mr. Nice Guy. Libra is about diplomacy. It's about, and don't pass off Libras as lightweights, because they are the ultimate strategists of the cosmos. They can play series of events to get to where they're going in a way that you don't even know that they were fighting. On the other hand, when Mercury, Mars, and the Sun, one by one, all move into Scorpio, and of course, the moon moves around so quickly in 1 month, it's going to go around all the signs. But we come back here to October 1st, and just doing this a quick now, day at a time, we can see that there's Mercury moving into Libra, as I said earlier, on the 4th. And here's Venus moving into Virgo. And I said I would say something more about Venus in Virgo, where Venus is in Virgo from the 10th all the way through the end of the month. And Venus is what we like, and Virgo is about being useful, being efficient. It's about almost being timid, or it's not quite cautious. There's a subtle difference, but Virgo energy only wants to do what's correct, wants to do what's right. And with Venus in Virgo, after months of it being in, let's show everybody what I want and what I need, and let's create, let's make things out in the open, let's put things on public display, so to speak. When Venus moves into Virgo, it becomes a lot more cautious. I always think of Fiddler on the Roof, that song Matchmaker. I always think of matchmaker, okay, it's list maker. Because Venus in Virgo, and even with the Sun, even now kind of, or last month being in Virgo, but it's almost like when Venus moves into Virgo, before saying what we want, we're going to kind of make that list. We're going to be a little bit more careful about it. But now, as we move on, we can watch Mars moving from Libra, where we've been engaged in this game of diplomacy. Again, there can be explosions and so on, but it's been intense. Oh, and I need to back this up a little bit, because the other thing here that's of significance, and all these colored lines in the middle, of which we're only going to talk about a few tonight. You can go, if you're interested, to my YouTube channel, and the monthly forecast takes this on a much deeper level with the aspects. But these are the mathematical or geometrical relationships between planets which create the hum, the buzz. It's like in music, two notes make a chord, and that chord either sounds nice or it's mysterious or it's dissonant. And astrology is the same thing. The planets, because they're all sounding at the same time, are all basically making music. So what we have coming up on October 7th is Mars making a 90-degree angle with Pluto. Remember, Pluto's stationary. Pluto's holding the power right now. It ain't moving. It's like got everything else in a hidden hold. And on the 8th, Mars makes an exact 90-degree angle. Do you remember what I said about 90-degree angles, about squares? That's the crisis. That's the conflict that comes into awareness. And so what we can expect is over the next few days, and even over the weekend and by Monday, we will see this conflict that has to do with a hidden power struggle. And again, you can't make this stuff up, but you can see this unfolding on the floor of the Congress in the United States, this Mars square Pluto. But here's the important thing to understand, two things. One is when things play out on a global political level like that, that's fine, but they're also playing out in our individual lives, whether we're aware of it or not. And so it's good not to just be invisible about the dynamics in our life and just think that everything's about what's going on out there, because this is indicative of some facing some issues and some power struggles and some deep conflicts that are seeking seeking resolution. There's a difference. But watch what happens over the month. This is on October 8th, when Mars basically moves into Scorpio. That's, again, no more Mr. Nice Guy. In Scorpio, Mars is going to fight the fight out in the open rather than trying to be nice. But now we have the Sun and Mercury moving through Libra, both pretty quickly. And into this, we have on October 14th, the moon, which comes flying through there. By the way, these little gray upside down headphones, those are called the nodes of the moon. And that's the place where the orbit of the moon around the Earth intersects the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And when there's a new moon or full moon that's close to that point, that's when we get an eclipse. Because the moon's going around the Earth every month. But if it's at the same plane, if it's on that same line up north, up, down, with the sun and the Earth all together, that's when we get an eclipse. And you can see on October 14th, the new moon, the lineup of the sun and the moon at 21 degrees of Libra is just a couple of degrees away from that nodal axis. And so we have it's a total eclipse of the sun, because the moon comes between the Earth and the sun. But it's a very special case because the moon's orbit is elliptical and it's a little bit farther away from the Earth now than it usually is. That's called its apogee. And so when the eclipse is total, the moon is going to look a little bit smaller. It's like the opposite of a supermoon when it looks really big. And therefore, the sky won't get black and the stars won't come out, but you'll actually see this ring of fire. And I had the privilege of seeing one of these annular eclipses in Singapore back in Boxing Day, day after Christmas, back in 2019. That was the last of the pre-COVID days. Anyhow, eclipses are incredibly important. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier is that October is eclipse season. There's an eclipse, a new moon eclipse, a solar eclipse on October 14th that can be very powerful in turning things upside down, inside out. The ancients said on a solar eclipse, the chant was, "The king must die, long live the king." There's something here about the ending of the old and the beginning of the new, and no astrological events are final. This isn't about a complete clearing of the deck, but we're seeing these eclipses very active right now in the realm of Libra, diplomacy, of interaction that is about seeking balance and balance of power. But Mars has moved into Scorpio. And if we move this ahead a day at a time, you can see then on the 15th, the moon will move into Scorpio. And then by the 22nd, Mercury catches up with the sun. You can see it back here. Mercury is behind the sun. And by the 22nd, Mercury catches up with the sun, lines up with the sun directly, and then it moves into Scorpio. And then by the 23rd, we have the sun and Mercury and Mars in Scorpio. And I'm guessing that the end of October, we'll see a lot of very powerful intensity. If we think things are intense now, things are apparently happening because there's a lot of action in the faster, the faster moving planets. But by the end of the month, we're going to see this really heighten. And something else occurs, and that is as each of these planets move from Libra into Scorpio, like Mars is doing now, we have the sun, which will then reach that 27-degree point, and it will make a square with Pluto the same day that Mercury does. And remember, Mercury is about communication. And here we want our communication, Mercury, to be diplomatic and lined up with our consciousness, our will, and our sense of wanting to find equanimity, Libra, harmony, balance. But it's 90 degrees to Pluto, so the deep power structure won't let us. And it sounded like I was saying something about the political situation, and I am, but we all have deep power structures in our own individual personal lives. And we may feel totally frustrated because we know where we want to go and how we can get there and what to do, and yet somehow there's things in place that are basically more than we are individually that are not going to just be overcome by our Mars push or conflict. And so October 20th through, or the 18th, 19th, 20th through the 23rd, when those planets have all moved into Scorpio, that's some pretty intense times. And we also see those planets as they move, each of them, Mars, Mercury, and the sun, from Libra into Scorpio. They will, and let's just go back way back right to there. And we can see that as Mars being the leading planet, going from sweet, nice, harmonious, harmony-seeking Libra and squaring Pluto, as it moves into water sign, fixed water sign Scorpio, it makes a trine. And again, these inner lines are all, they're all showing the geometry, the mathematical relationship here. I'm going to get rid of some of these extra lines that, just bear with me here a quick second. And here we go. So I'm just cleaning that up to just get rid of some of those lines. And I'm going to even, oh, that's fine for now. So we can see that as Mars, going back a couple of days prior, Mars was 90 degrees, that red square line, to Pluto. And then as it moves out of Libra and into Scorpio, it immediately picks up on 1/3 of a circle to Saturn. Remember, Saturn is the planet of make it real. And when Mars makes a trine, which is harmonious to Saturn, we get to stabilize things. And so I think we can see here, there's two things going on through October. One is this incredible demonstration of the power structure, who's in charge, who's in control, again, individually and perhaps governmentally. And then we're going to see a solidification and a way to organize this and make it all real. And that comes right intermixed in this whole same period of time as Mars forms that harmonious trine to Saturn on the 12th and 13th. And that's followed then by the sun as it makes the square to Pluto and then makes its trine to Saturn on the days after that 22nd, or 21st is to 22nd, 23rd. And so we may see some solidity come out of all of this. And astrologically, many people say squares are bad because they take work and they're conflictive, and trines are good because they flow. Well, trines are good if they're flowing in the direction that is conducive to how you think you want to flow. Because a trine can be so smooth, but flowing in a way that it's hard for you to break out of that. And all I can say is that by the end of the month, there will be some things that right now feel very unstable and very conflictive that might be more stabilized, which may or may not be good from your perspective of judgment. And understand that if you judge something as good, someone else may judge that exact same thing as bad, even if they're perceiving the same event. But to complicate matters, we can experience an event and both experience very different events, as crazy as that sounds. So, so the eclipse, let me come back to the moon. On the 14th, we talked about that being an annular or total annular eclipse. Technically, it's not total because the sun is not completely blacked out. And as the moon comes around toward full, as it moves into Taurus on October 28th, it will line up. I'm not going to adjust this so that the exact same degree, but the exact opposition or is, so the total eclipse of the sun on October 14th is at 10:55 a.m. That's Pacific Daylight Time. And the lunar eclipse, which is a full moon eclipse, occurs at 1:24 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. But if you have a lunar eclipse that occurs in the middle of the day and it's a full moon eclipse, you can't see it because the sun is out. So we won't be able to see that from here. But then again, we live in Seattle and we never can see anything from here because there's a thing that we call cloud. So this full moon eclipse at the end of the month is, both of these eclipses are about letting go of something. And this eclipse is significant because the sun is in Scorpio, lined up with Mercury and Mars, intensifying our perspective, intensifying the power of what we don't say, of what's beneath the surface, the hidden power. In a way, all those things that I said earlier about Pluto are in some ways also about Scorpio, because there's an affinity between planets and signs. And Mars is at home in Scorpio, and Pluto also seems to have an energy that relates to Scorpio. So there's that intensity there. But it's that intensity of who's in control with how we speak and what we do about it, the sun, Mercury, and Mars, that's opposing the moon in Taurus, full moon in Taurus, that's lined up with Jupiter. We haven't talked about Jupiter tonight, but you can think of most words that have a J in them, like jolly and a J sound, giant, J, B, G, expansive, pop, burp, bloat, belly, baby, buoyant, happy, benefit. You hear those words? Those are all Jupiterian words. Jupiter is about big. Jupiter is the planet. It's the biggest planet. It's the magnifying lens. And so this eclipse has Jupiter lined up with the eclipsed moon. And Jupiter is in Taurus, which is the opposite of Scorpio. Scorpio is about the complexity of everything we don't see. And Taurus is about the simplicity of what we can sense with our five senses. And so I would imagine that this eclipse, by the end of the month, we're going to really be pulled in two directions. And that is, are we going to delve into the hidden meaning and explore that and work with that energy? Or are we going to run away from it and just take what's on the surface and say, I'm going to just pay attention to that because I can turn that into something more, and then be distracted from what might be hidden and what might be more real? So Let me just see if there's anything else I want to touch base on. And again, for the day by day stuff, if you go the YouTube channel, for those of you who are on the live stream, you obviously already know that it's youtube.com/@Rick Levine. And for those of you who are here, you can just go to YouTube and search for Rick Levine or Rick Levine Astrologer. But the October forecast is an in-depth dive of all the aspects day by day by day by day. And then for those of you who are on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Rick Levine, there are other things that you can get, including a mid-month update, which is a deeper dive towards the last part of the month, because on the month forecast, I focus more on the front end. So with that said, let me just see if there's anything else here. I'm going to bring the chart back to where we are now. There's something else that I want to mention. It's these green lines, and I'm not going to take a deep dive on this right now. But as we go through the month of October, there are more green lines than there usually are. And the color codes here are the blue lines are the trines and sextiles, and they're a smooth flowing energy, for better or worse. The red lines are 90 degrees and 180 degrees, like a half a circle, a square, or an opposition. I'm sorry, a half a circle, an opposition, or a square, a quarter of a circle. And those are more conflictive and tense and stressful. The orange lines are like halves of squares, and they're also motivational. They're stressful. We got to do something. And they're all based upon particular angles. I'm not going into that right now. But the green lines are basically, the name of the aspect is a quincunx. It's a crazy Latin word, and it means quinc 5, unx 12th. And quincunx is 5/12. Well, 1/12 of 360 degrees is 30 degrees. That's a sign. There are 12 signs in the zodiac. When two planets are by degree 5 signs apart. If there were 6 signs apart, there would be an opposition here, like Mars is to the node in Chiron. There's an opposition, that red line. But when two planets are 1 sign away from being in exact opposition, here we have Venus at 27 Leo. The opposition point would be 27 Aquarius. But 1 sign before that, we have Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn. So the quincunx is 5/12, or 2 planets exactly 5 signs apart. And they're sticky. No, that's not quite the right word. They're annoying. They're irritating. They need adjustment, but no amount of adjustment fixes them. When you have a dynamic square and you do something about it, something happens. There's resolution. But with a quincunx, it's like things just don't seem to resolve. And I'm not going to play this through the whole month, but in the months that I've seen, there are more quincunxes this month. I'm just playing this through the month than there usually are. And so that becomes an important background piece of this month also, this inability to solve all the things that are within sight, but we can't bring them into enough focus to deal with them, but we can't make them go away. I sometimes refer to that as the mosquito in the tent as you're falling asleep. You can't find it to kill it, but every time you start to doze, there it is buzzing again. So it's all too much. 2 eclipses, lots of planets changing signs, the inner planets moving really fast, stirring up a lot of noise. We're at a very dynamic point. If I say we're at a turning point, well, we've actually been at a turning point since the mid-60s, but we're actually now at a turning point based upon what did and didn't happen in the 2010s and through the Capricorn alignment that I and many astrologers wrote about back when Saturn and Pluto aligned at in opposition around the World Trade Tower bombing back in September of 2001. Like many astrologers, I noted the next time that Saturn and Pluto would be active would be when they joined in conjunction around January 12th of 2020. And of course, that was the day that the COVID fiasco became formalized, and that the Wuhan laboratory announced the DNA structure, the genome for the virus, and so on. So the point is that we are at a turning point, and that turning point can be looked at as a turning point from the 20th century through the 21st century. Or it can be looked at as a turning point from the 60s to the 2020s, or it can be looked at as a turning point from 2020 to 2027, or it can be looked at as a turning point October of 2023. It depends. The universe, the cosmos, is fractal. And so the patterns keep repeating at larger and smaller systems. And so the fact is that we are in the midst of a point of amazing change, regardless of how much we narrow down on that point. That's it for this part. If anyone has any questions from here, I'd be glad to entertain them. Otherwise, questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, please. Speak up.
Does the fifth month apart, one for a Virgo to a Capricorn? This is a personal question about relationships. Would that be an unsolvable conflict because it's 5 months between the two people?
Well, it can be, as long as you don't generalize that to anyone who is born with the sun, meaning someone whose sun sign is Virgo and someone whose sun sign, the quincunx it's actually not Virgo, it would be Leo to Capricorn. The quincunx from Virgo, the opposition would be Pisces. And so the quincunxes to Virgo, the one away from the opposition, would be Aquarius and Aries. Those are the quincunxes. But if you say, I'm a Virgo, my sun sign is Virgo, and you're an Aquarius, therefore our suns are quincunx, therefore we're always going to be, annoyed with each other. That doesn't work, because the sun, although it's the brightest and sometimes the most obvious thing, it's not necessarily the most important thing in a relationship, because what about your moon sign, which is how you feel at home? And what about your Mercury sign of how you communicate and so on? And so you can't make those generalizations that these two signs don't get along or do get along just based upon I'm a this and he or she is a that, because it's way more complicated than that. So that's the short answer. And the longer answer, if you're really interested, I have a short course on the astrology of relationships on the Astrology Hub, astrologyhub.com. But yeah, and we tend to project in relationships those things that we don't expect that we don't express in our own chart. For example, if I was born with my Venus in Cancer and I'm a guy, well, then ancient or traditional astrology would suggest that the woman, Venus in my life, should basically step into my Venus in Cancer. Therefore, I would be really good with being with a Cancerian because my Venus was in Cancer. By the same token, a woman whose Mars was in Cancer traditionally might find herself in a relationship or married to a man who is a Cancer because the Mars is the man. I mean, this is old gender, politics here, but it's very telling. And what it's really mostly telling about is that in ancient times, because of gender structure, that men tended to suppress their moon and Venus, the feminine energies, the yin energies of the chart, and therefore they would project it. Psychology 101, Freud, Jung, that which I don't express, I project. So if I have a Venus that I've been trained not to experience, and it's in denial, I'm going to look around and I'm going to find someone who's wearing that and go, ah, I recognize that. That's mine. By the same token, if you're a woman, chances are in a more traditional setting, you might have been instructed to not touch the blowtorch, the tools, to not take care of business, and to just simply find a Mars unit to do that for you. And therefore, you could look at the Mars in a woman's chart and say, well, she's likely to be suppressing or repressing that energy, and therefore unconsciously seeking that out there and finding the relationship. So this is just the tip of a whole, more fascinating iceberg here about how relationships work and how astrology helps us to understand them. So thank you for the question. I know that didn't answer your specific question, but I hope it answered. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take about a 10-minute break. And if you've never had and for those of you who have had enough, adios, good night, I love you, thank you for coming out. For those of you who want to stick around for another short round, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw 3 names out of a hat.
It's fine.
Oh, I can't say my screw's loose, but someone has become unbolted. All right. If you've never had your chart done here, I would invite you to put your name, your full name, although because we're online, I'll only use a first name, but your name, your email address, your birth date, place, and time of day, AM or PM. And I think I have some little things that you can fill out. I'll check to see if I have any. And they'll be here on this table. And then I'll draw 3 names out of a hat, and I'll do a very short look at 3 charts that I've never seen before for people that I don't know, and show you how this works in real time. And we might also look at just how that Saturn return might work. You see, an individual can never have a Pluto return because none of us will live to be 248 years old. Unless AI kicks in a lot quicker than we think. So let's take about a 10-minute break. For those of you who are watching online, we're going to mute the microphone, but we're not going off the air. So just be patient. We will be back. For those of you who are here, if you want to get something at the bar, no, we're closed, so too late. However, you can buy stuff. And as you know, tonight is a free event, but donations are happily welcome. They don't go to me. I do this as a public service for the community. But if you'd like to leave a donation, you can do that at the cash register. They'll take that and register it accordingly. And it helps them sponsor events like this where there's no charge. And also, and lastly, the best way sometimes that we can vote is economically, rather than buying that birthday present or whatever it was that you were thinking you were buying at some big department store down the block or over in the mall. Share the wealth, spread some love, buy something, because that's what keeps this place in business. So with that, I'll see you in about 10 minutes. And for those of you who want to submit your name, you can congregate around this table, and I'll either have slips for you to fill out or send you away and say, just write it on a piece of paper and fold it up. So that's it. Did I miss anything? Thank you. And thank you all for coming out. And we will continue in just a moment. Okay, we are going to be back. Although quite frankly, I wish the break was the evening. And for the 15 minutes of break, that's when I got to talk. And then for the rest of the time, I just got to hang out with you lovely people. It's like this is not fair. Well, I think we have, I would say a winner. I know you didn't know there was a contest, but there is someone here from Australia. There's a couple of people who drove down from Canada and up from Seaside, Oregon, and some Portlanders, Portland. And yeah, and the rest of us are just slumming in the hood. Okay, let me have a sip of water, which I intended to do when I stepped off stage 15 minutes ago or so and never got to it because there were too many lovely people.
Who adore you?
Okay, knock it off.
Move your charger. Move your charger.
For those of you who are online and didn't see that, I just spilled a half a glass of water, which will actually be just fine here. It'll evaporate. All right, well, at least I had a sip of the water before.
Water boy.
All right. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And Sam, are we online?
Yep.
We think so. And I have here a hat that you can probably see in the little corner here. And in it, there's a bunch of folded up pieces of paper, of which I'm going to, oh, thank you, of which I'm going to pick one, two, except I put it right in the puddle of water there.
For a water sign.
It was, or a water sign, or a water birth. And three. All right. Stay there. I love to exert control over inanimate objects. There's a wonderful book by Lyle Watson. Anyone here ever read any Lyle Watson books? Oh man, get with it. So Lyle Watson, I guess was an anthropologist, but he wrote some brilliant books, a number of them about just very magical ways of looking at the universe. He wrote a book called Supernature and one called Beyond Supernature. He wrote a book called Heaven's Breath, and the subtitle was A Natural History of the Wind. Brilliant writer, but they're all nonfiction books, although when you read some of them, they feel like they could be fiction. One of his books, and the reason why he came to mind as I knocked over the glass of water, is he wrote a book called The Secret Life of Inanimate Objects. And it's about stones that weep and diamonds that have bad luck and things that seem to carry energy, even though they are not animate. He wrote some extraordinary books. All right, so I have 3 charts picked. The rules are simple. If I pick your name, I will not say your last name, but you need to, wave your arms around so that we know who we're making fun. No, I'm not making fun of. So that we know whose chart we're looking at. And I ask you to be as honest as you can in our interactions. The camera will not go on you, but I will ask you to show up and be real. And because we're in a public setting like this, how much you share, if I ask a question, is totally up to you. I have no problem at all with you saying, I'd rather not talk about it, or and just pass it off. I get it. It's okay. The three charts that I have, the first one I have is Lisa with a lot of last names.
Yeah,
And that's Lisa born April 1st.
that'd be me.
How'd you do that?
Oh,
Lisa and I had a short conversation and a photo op with Lisa and her husband, Ted.
yeah.
Theo. All right, so not sure how that happened, but it seems to happen that way sometimes. And so I am going to, other than having a very short interaction with Lisa, I'm going to put in her chart, Lisa, and I always put an SF after there because that stands for soul food in my mind. And Lisa's birthday is April the 1st, 1961. And that's 4:46 p.m. And that's in the land of Rich, Washington. And looking at Lisa's chart for the first time. So I have a theory that when you look at a chart for the first time and it's an Aries way of looking at a chart, but I do teach this to my students. And that's basically first shot, best shot. And that doesn't mean the first thing you see is the most important thing, but it means that's where you go in. And it's like the question always is what jumps off the page at you. And the first thing that I noticed just scanning my eyes around here really quickly is I looked for the sun and the sun in mid Aries. And as I would do in a session with a client, I would say in the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I am an Aries also, but born April 6th. Everything else in my chart is different, but we share a mid-Aries sun sign. However, in my chart, I was born with Mars, which is the planet that relates to Aries. In traditional astrology, Mars is at home. It rules Aries, or it's at home. Aries is its domicile, to use the Latin word. My Mars in my chart is lined up with my sun at home in Aries. Lisa's Mars, and we know whatever sign your sun is, whatever planet relates to that, is going to be more important, perhaps, than some of the others. So I look at Lisa's chart, I see she's in Aries. My first thing is, okay, where's Mars? And I go, Mars is here in Cancer. And Mars is connected to the sun by a thick red line. And I know that's a 90-degree angle because it's a red line. And I know it's within a degree or so of being exact because it's 12 degrees to 13 degrees Aries to Cancer. It's actually almost 2 degrees from exact. But that's a square, meaning that astrologically, we know that there's dynamic tension or conflict between how the sun in Aries illuminates Lisa and charges her up to think like our other Aries friend, Ram Dass, be here now, do it in the moment. This is the moment that's important. Aries is not afraid of doing something new. Well, it might be afraid, but it has the courage, the Mars red blood, cells to confront its fear and just be in the moment because it knows that every moment is new. And this pioneer and or enthusiasm for what is in the moment is certainly part of being an Aries. But Lisa, the question is, okay, so how do you get there, Lisa? And she gets there with that Mars in Cancer, which basically says, I'm not interested in pushing into new territory. I'd rather wait for it to come and find me. If it's good, it'll know I'm good and it'll find me. You see, because Mars, which is how we go after something, it's how we get it, it's how we defend our territory, it's how we push into new territory. Mars in Cancer is a bit of a puzzle because it doesn't fit into the male, into the patriarchal version I think it's patriarchal there. It doesn't fit into the patriarchal version of Mars because Mars should be macho and it should go out and conquer new territory and it should take over things. It should, rape and plunder and pillage and be a real red-blooded sword or gun-carrying, Martian. The word Mars, martial law. This is all about, the Mars, the warrior. Except Cancer is a sign of nurturing. It's a sign of taking care of. It's a sign that is about receiving yin rather than yang, masculine pushing outward. And so Mars is a bit of an anathema. I'm stumbling over Latin today. It's an anathema. It's against what it sounds like it should be in Cancer, because how do you go forward by going backwards? Well, one of the things we know about the sign of Cancer is that it's about home and family. And I would say that the crab, Cancer is just Latin for crab, has a hard outer shell because it's afraid of getting washed away by the tides, because the crabs live in the intertidal zone where the tide comes up and down every day. Twice a day, up and down. And so it's always changing. And so Mars in Cancer wants to build a hard outer shell to protect itself from the changes, while the Sun in Aries says, screw that, I want to go push some boundaries and be out on the edge. And so I would assume from the beginning that there's a bit of kind of a dilemma of push-pull here, or do it, don't do it, go for it, don't go for it, speak your piece and be, brave and stand out and tell people what's on your mind, versus no, just kind of feel what's going on and move through that quietly. But then this is doubled down by the fact that the moon, when you were born, was moving through the sign of Libra. And although it's not a full moon, it's not an eclipse, it's actually the day after a full moon. And so with the Sun in Aries and the moon in Libra, it's kind of still signs that are opposite. The Sun in Aries says, the fuel of your furnace is saying, me, I. And this is not about a narcissistic I, it's about everything in the universe is experienced through me. It's the baby playing with its fingers and toes. If it's in my world, that's what's important. It's part of that whole self. And yet with the moon in Libra, everything is balanced off of how other people are perceiving it. So there's this emphasis in relationship. And I don't mean a particular relationship, be it marriage or parenting or childing or whatever. I mean, in just the concept of how you move through the world, there's always this tension, this dynamic between the inside and the outside. And that Mars in Cancer chooses to resolve it, not necessarily by going to the mat every time and fighting for what's yours, but instead kind of maybe persistently holding your position and knowing that eventually the tide will change to where it is that you want it to go, especially since the Libra moon, although it looks like it's always just being nice, is always being nice in a way that's moving things towards its direction, because that's what Libra does. Libra is the sign like, oh no, this isn't about me, but on the other hand, this is just, I think this is the best for you. Well, it's the best for you because it'll work for me too. Anyhow, there are many other things we could look at here. We could talk about the fact that, like the Sun, Venus is also in your sign in Aries. We could talk about how every 20 years, Jupiter and Saturn line up, a pair of cosmic opposites, Jupiter about expansion, Saturn about contraction, Saturn about the goals that we set, and Jupiter about the rewards that we achieve if we reach our goals. If we're disciplined, Saturn, we are rewarded, Jupiter. And every 20 years, even culturally, you see a difference when Jupiter and Saturn align. And then 20 years again, they're aligned in a different sign, and then 20 years again, but at the 10-year, they're opposite. And so every 10 years, Jupiter and Saturn are like new moon and full moon. It's like a new Jupiter, full Jupiter. And that happens every decade, that Jupiter and Saturn align in 1900, 1920, 1940, 1960, 61, 1980, 2000, 2001, and then 2020, 2021. And then on the off years, they're in opposition. And you can look at the difference of the 1920s to the 1930s, to the 40s, to the 50s, to the 60s, to the 70s, and you can see that decades do have their own signature. And it's important that Lisa was born at the beginning of that signature that became the 60s. And although she lived through the 60s, she incorporated it in a pre-social realm, but it was still around her as Uranus, you can see here, moving faster than Pluto, would catch up to Pluto by 1965, 66. So that becomes an important piece of this puzzle also. And then the other thing that stands out here, and again, there's a lot of different ways to go, is the fact that the moon was at 21.5 degrees of Libra. And Uranus, we talked about Uranus before, that's the rebel, that's the eccentric, that's the electric, that's the I'm different. That Uranus was at 21 degrees, almost 22 degrees of Leo, which means that these were, you can see the fat blue line, which is a sextile, which has to do with cooperation and kind of like this sense of an opportunity from these two planets that are working well together, but you have to make the connection for them to work. And what are those two planets? They're the Libra nice moon that wants to be the balance point, the go-between, the in-between, to somehow make this and that get along or work. And then Uranus, the planet of instantaneous shock, awareness, awakening, and what is it that you do for work?
I have kind of dual lives, but I have a business called Inner and Outer Beauty, and I am basically been in the beauty industry and the wellness industry for 40 years.
So for those online that may not have heard that, Lisa's basically been in the wellness industry and beauty at home with that Mars in Cancer. But I would imagine that there's something about the way you interact with clients that has that Uranian lightning striking, sudden awaken, opening. We're not looking, I'm not saying that there are no gradual changes, but we're looking at instantaneous intervention, even though you're doing it by invitation.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I call myself a therapist with hair in the middle.
Uh-huh.
And I don't advertise. If you don't know me. But
Got it. So Lisa's hard to find, but when you find her, she's ready to attack.
we have to
One of the things that I would note here is that, and I said that I would talk about this in a couple of charts, if we looked at where planets are now, and we can do this really easily and really quickly here, just pulling one little piece out of so here we have Lisa's chart still in the center. All the lines are gone, but you can see that the sun is in Aries and that the moon is in Libra. And here's that Jupiter and Saturn connection that's going on. So one of the things that we see immediately is the planet Pluto, which was here when Lisa was born back in Virgo. Pluto has moved through this part of the chart. And Pluto right now is lined up with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in your birth chart. And so we know that in some ways, the part of you that is in business, business is basically Jupiter and Saturn together. Jupiter is growth, Saturn is structure. And that business has to have enough growth and enough structure to survive. But if it has too much Jupiter growth without structure, it fails. And if it has too much structure, think too many accountants, without Jupiter sales, it collapses on itself. And so this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in some ways is part of your creative dance in business. And as Pluto these days, and probably for the last year or so, and for the next year or so, is going forth and back and forth and back and forth over these planets, really causing a deep transformation in what it is that you do and how you do your business. But the more, I don't want to say more important, but the other thing here is that if we were to back this up a couple of years, we can see that going back to 2000, Saturn and Pluto had just aligned in Capricorn, and Saturn was just coming toward, if we do this here like now, a month at a time.
I think 2020.
In 2020, did I say something else?
2000, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this gap that occurs between my brain and my mouth more often than I care. And I'd blame it on old age, but I've been doing it since birth. So roughly, as we move a month at a time, as we move toward the end of 2020, we have Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn all coming together toward the end of Capricorn, Saturn returning to where it was when you were born, saying, gee, what happened 29 years ago and what did you set into motion? And let's just hold that thought for a quick second and zap back here in reverse. This is like a reverse time machine. And we go back to roughly 1990, 1991, in that period of time when Saturn was back to where it was when you were born. And so one would imagine that that 1990-91 period of time was a time where you either made changes or changes happened in your life that set into motion, to some extent, the next 30 years, all the way up to the 2020-21 period.
True. I left a relationship and went to university to grow up.
So Lisa said she left a relationship and went to a university and took a different course in life. And her words, I grew up. So coming back to where we are now, and again, we could go through this on a whole much deeper dive, but I'm just looking at where we are right now with Saturn through the fall of 2020, which is intriguing because at the same time, we jumped ahead too far. As we move through that period of time, by Christmas of 2020, we had Jupiter and Saturn both in December of 2020, moving through the last degrees of Capricorn, and then actually aligning, Jupiter moving faster than Saturn, so that by the beginning of 2021, Jupiter and Saturn had both moved into Aquarius, and it's almost like, I made it through that, and now I can move forward. There's something going on. It wasn't really quite done because those planets retrograded back, but it's now Pluto a couple of years later that's coming through that same area that's doing the deeper transformation on the changes that on some level you put into motion back when you were 28, 29, 30, that came around when you were in the 2020, 2021 period. And now it's processing through on a deeper level. How does that sit with you, to give us a little feedback?
I'm back in therapy. Truly, and
online, what Lisa said is, I'm back in therapy, and
yeah.
Everyone laughed and clapped.
Yeah. And in 2020, my dad died, and right now I'm a caregiver for my mom, and she's dying. And I think that this also has a lot to do with my whole structure of how I see.
So again, for people online, Lisa's going through and been through a lot of very deep and profound changes. And I would just suggest that these changes are evolutionary, like caterpillar becoming butterfly. And, oftentimes I hear astrology students fearful that they're having a Saturn or Pluto transit because it means death. And it often can relate to death with two important caveats. One is that the death isn't necessarily physical. It's a processing out of something into something else. And number two, it's not necessarily your death. that Saturn being the grim reaper, the end of the line, you know, Saturn is Satan, it's the what you get at the end, often isn't about your demise, because what we know is, but from what we assume we know, is that once you die, you know, once you leave your body here, it's like you're on a journey. You're gone somewhere else. There's like you've walked from this constrained room into something that we can't quite imagine, but consciousness doesn't die. The physical body does. And from that standpoint, the finality of Saturn isn't about the finality of your death. It's about the finality of your death as perceived by everyone who didn't die. And so just coming around to the fact that Lisa had mentioned she'd, you know, lost a parent and has another one, you know, aging, that becomes part of it. So I hope that made some sense to you. That's
Yeah,
more, you know.
I'm like a grape turning into wine or something right now.
So Lisa said she's not a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. She's a grape, preferably a Bordeaux grape, grown on the eastern slopes of the Cascades, turning into a fine Cabernet Sauv, or maybe, you know, even a Malbec or some other rich, deep red wine, a grape turning into wine. Okay, thank you for that, Lisa. Okay. Next case, we have George. George, another person who I had barely a few words with during halftime. And no, I don't pick these out. They just happened. Okay, or George. And okay, so that's an 11/30/47. Ooh, I know Saturn Pluto right away. We'll talk about that in a moment. And that's at 23:30, 11:30 p.m. And that is in Munich. Okay, so one of the things we see is how different every chart is. And with George's chart, one of the things where my mind, where I go absolutely first, well, no, let me say this, because I know the slow moving outer planets, you do enough of these, it's like driving around in your neighborhood, you know where, you know, buildings are. And so I know that Saturn and Pluto aligned like they did on right around September 11th, 2001, and like they did on January 12th, 2020. I know that Saturn and Pluto aligned in August of 1947. So I knew that I thought was going to be the most important thing of the chart. But Saturn and Pluto, not only are they aligned, they're about 8 degrees apart by then, but Mars is also in the mix. So there's 3 planets in Leo, which might have been, that's the place where I thought my mind was going to go first when I looked at the chart. But then I realized there was a nearly exact, within almost within a third of a degree, a conjunction between the Sun and Jupiter in Sagittarius. And let me tell you why that rocks the boat. Because every sign connects with a planet, every planet connects with a sign. Some planets connect with 2 signs, like a morning star and evening star, so to speak. Jupiter connects with Sagittarius. So every 12 years for 1 year, Jupiter is in its home sign, Sagittarius, which gives more power and more strength and more dignity, would be an astrological word to use. It gives that Jupiter more dignity because it's in its domicile. It's a king at home in its castle. But it's not just Jupiter in its own sign, it's the Sun illuminating, vibrating, powering, energizing that Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius. And so we know that that's an important piece of George's story. And yet we also know a few other things. One, we know that George's moon is in Cancer, not the same as Lisa's Mars in Cancer. But again, there's this outgoing, uplifting, adventurous kind of let's go for it piece that's fueling the fire of George. And yet the moon is reflecting on that in a way that's more, I just want to stay home. I just want to have, I want to focus inward. I want to be receptive. I want to be sensitive. Or maybe it's not even I want to be, it's that I am. And again, in the spirit of full astrological disclosure, I too am a proud owner of a Cancer moon that sometimes I love and sometimes it makes me crazy. And I heard someone say the Cancer moon word, and that was they went, "Aw." I always say that my Cancer moon prevents me from being an asshole. And I'm not. I mean, people who know me, I'm not. But I would be if I didn't have that kind of wuss factor of really caring. I mean, I'd like, there are times when I would like not to care. But I don't have that luxury. And so therefore, do you relate to any of that?
Oh, absolutely. For example, like hundreds of miles around in Europe with homelessness and destitute poverty is such a huge problem. And it's so hard to even just knowing that, you know, there's anything we can do about it. Why doesn't government allow?
So I'm interrupting you only because the people online can't hear you, and I don't want to let them hang too long. But George said yes. But just the awareness of sensitive to those social things around, regardless of where optimism might want to take them. But then there's two other pieces here that are significant. Well, there's more than that significant. But one is the fact that all these planets in Leo that are hidden in what we call the 12th house. But this is the part of you that has relentless intention, regardless of what you do about it or regardless of how people perceive it, because there's a Virgo rising, and the rising sign is kind of how we interface with reality. So George can have all of these big ideas and big thoughts. He can be very perceptive and receptive and sensitive and have this intention that other people don't know until they really encounter it on a deeper level. But they might not get that from him when they first meet him, because that Virgo rising is going to kind of filter that stuff away and only interact with and present those things that are useful in the present moment. So there's this narrowing that occurs. It's not a narrowing by making less than, it's a filtering to be more effective in the present moment. And it's an earthiness that is given to your chart too. And then the other thing in your chart that I think is interesting and significant is the fact that you have Mercury and Chiron, which we haven't talked a lot about, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it now, other than to say that Chiron was the original teacher, mentor, healer, but it was projecting its wounds and fixing them in other people. It's sometimes referred to as the wounded healer. But your Mercury and Chiron together in Scorpio suggest to me, especially connected to the nodal axis, suggest a healing orientation in life that might use words to in some way teach or to make things better or to heal. And yet that perspective is at odds with the stability and the structure, maybe not yours, but the structures within which you work. That there's a conflict between the rigidness, that would be the Saturnian rigidness and the Plutonian power structure behind it, and the emotionality that sometimes might feel blocked in working with those energies. I don't know if that made any sense to you at all. The answer was just yes, rather than the story. Yeah.
Scorpio Mercury.
So that's really what I have to say there. I also think it's interesting that Uranus in your chart, that planet, of social change and shock and surprise and revolution, is harmoniously connected to Saturn, which in some ways would lead me to believe that there's a flow of energy between the part of you that can stand on the edge of the cliff and acknowledge the structure while wanting to jump off, but everyone else around you jumping off, but that there's this dance between the old and the new, the past and the future, that somehow you pull both in and work with them, that prevent you from kind of going too far out over an edge or being locked too much in the past. And again, I don't know if you can relate to that or if that makes sense.
I used to say sometimes my epitaph will be, you wanted to change the world, but you couldn't even change yourself.
George said he wanted as his epitaph. Not that anyone wants an epitaph, which are the words that appear written on your gravestone if you choose to get one. But it was, I wanted to change the world, but couldn't change myself or needed to change myself. Yeah. So yeah, it's that dance. I would imagine that this summer with Venus moving through Leo and then turning retrograde and not quite reaching your Mars and then turning retrograde and now turning direct and almost catching up to your Mars, that there was something in relationship, either to relationships or to money or to things that somehow are not out in the open, but that are important to you, that have either been tested or slowed down, but are now at the point of something's happening. And maybe, yesterday, today, tomorrow, next week, in some way you may be through whatever this may be important, but relative to the big scheme of things, a relatively minor, but maybe not unimportant now change. And I don't know if that rings any bells for you.
Not sure.
Not sure. Needs to think about it. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I got. I think I want to try to get one more chart in. Anything you need to either ask or say before we move on?
Something then having a lost track of it, but I think it was like right totally tied into what you just said, but it's something.
Being nearly George's age, I mean, very, very close to it. George is experiencing an elderly moment and had something had something to say and doesn't anymore. If you think of it, yell. We got one more chart we're going to look at, yeah. All I can say is, unfortunately, I understand. Oh my. Okay. Let's do one more here and call it a night. You know how you call it a night? You say, this is a night. I don't get it. Okay. Is it Anissa or Anissa? Hey. Okay, Anissa is born January 3rd, 1990, 1390. And that would be at 9:14 a.m., 9:14 a.m. And that would be in scenic core. That's almost Corvallis. Where'd the V go? Corvallis, Oregon. Well, yeah, that works. And for our third and final chart of the evening. All right, we see Anissa. Okay, so again, every chart's different. First thing I notice about this chart, and I kind of in my brain already had this one cooking, because in 1989, 90, 91, 92, 93, there was a very slow grouping of the outer planets: Saturn, 30-year cycle, 29.5-year cycle, Uranus, an 84-year cycle, and Neptune, a 165-year cycle. They were all coming together in the sign of Capricorn And so Anissa, we can see, has Uranus at 5, almost 6 degrees of Capricorn, coming into a conjunction that would have been exact in another couple of years, 92, 93, with Neptune. So Uranus, the planet of future, shock, surprise, awakening. Neptune, the planet of dreams and spirituality and imagination, which is also creativity, but is also delusional and is also not just spirituality, but also illusion. And Saturn, the planet of holding back, of authority, and Mercury retrograde, moving back into that pile up, and Venus retrograde, but having just escaped into Aquarius, that all of these planets having just come up over the eastern horizon and blotting out all the nighttime sky of stars. In a way, these planets, even though they're the most obvious, are also the most hidden. And so it's interesting to me that on some level, Anissa, with a cool, calm, collected Aquarius rising that can be interactive and friendly, is really holding a lot more cards than you might think. Whatever those cards are, we don't know, because she doesn't necessarily show them at first blush always. But we do know that there's we don't know. We would assume or imagine that there's an intriguing dance or balance between the sun, which is the structure, the Saturn, the hard-ass the hard-ass parents, the rules, the authority that was imposed on Anissa, the striving to overcome and to be something, or to show the world that there was more there than people might have judged. But then at the same time, with Neptune so close to the sun on the other side, there's this dreamer, there's this artist, there's this imagination, there's this creativity, and this can be played in one of many ways. And Anissa might share with us in a moment how this might play, but this is a dance between the harsh reality of meeting responsibility and doing what you're supposed to versus flaking out and dreaming up a life of whatever that is based upon spiritual dreams and imagination. And of course, one of the syntheses, one of the possible syntheses of this would be the idea of being disciplined. That would be Saturn when it came to creativity and or spiritual pursuit. That would be Neptune. And it might be things that people don't necessarily normally see when they meet you, because they meet the Aquarius part of you that's a little bit cooler and can hold some of that stuff into your own self. Now, having said all that, we also need to acknowledge that here there's an Aries moon. This is opposite, different than the ones we talked about earlier, where it was something to the Cancer. The Aries moon here feels like it reacts in the moment and can blow off whatever the feeling is and then move on without holding on to it, while everyone else is still holding on to something. Not that there's no holding on. It's, I think, in some ways, this ongoing dance of how crazy should I be? This is, the moon is square most closely to Uranus, the eclectic planet. And so it's, and Jupiter is at the opposite side of this. This is a very dynamic dance that ultimately is resolved by holding on to something, mastering it, and getting to where you're going, even though I think there can be a lot of pitfalls along the way, because you can be easily pulled off track by some good idea or something that sounds exciting. How'd we do, Anissa?
100%.
Anissa said 100%, but we only know what 1% of that is. You want to give us a sentence or two? Just.
Yeah, I've had a lot of like struggle with career and everything like that, and I really turned towards a much more spiritual, artistic path, and it probably seems like really outlandish to most people, but I'm really gonna.
So, and again, I'm going to cut you off because they can't hear you online. But Anissa talked about the struggle between the career, and I would imagine the fulfillment, the accomplishment, the setting goals, and so on, and the part of her that has a higher purpose, which would be a good Neptunian word, something that's more other dimensional, spiritual. And so there's just that, I think that becomes, an important thing. Now, again, without doing too deep a dive on this, I would imagine that that you might be in a little bit of a state of reprieve, but through, let's call it pre-COVID to post-COVID, not because of COVID specifically, but because of how you integrated and moved through that world. At that time, Pluto and Saturn and Jupiter were all moving through Capricorn. And so I imagine that this has been a very intense few years, and you're not quite done with it because it's going to take about another, maybe about another 4 or 5 years for Pluto to actually move not only out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, but for it to move beyond your ascendant, because I think that there's still transformation that is going to is gradually unfolding based upon the very real events that you took on probably very close to the Saturn return moment, which we'll look at here. Again, this is your chart still in the center. Here's Saturn where it is now. But if we back that Saturn up a month at a time, and I'm going to stop it. There it is backing over your ascendant in 2020, but we want to look for when Saturn first reached up. There we go. So here we are in January of 2019. Saturn's already in Capricorn. It's already, you feel the weight. In the beginning of 2019, it's already heavy. Your birthday, there's already some intensity going on, but it really takes through February and even through for you kind of to wear or to meet some of these responsibilities. And then by March, Saturn reaches the point 18 degrees, your Saturn was at 15. So Saturn returns to where it was when you were born. And so this is like the message that the universe gives you to grow up, become real, change this, do that. But I think that because Saturn then turned retrograde, you're not done with it. And all the way through the summer of 2019, Saturn turns retrograde, then it goes direct, and it goes back over that point again for the third and final time in December of 2019. But during that same period of time, Pluto, on its once every 250-year run, Pluto is also moving through that same area of the sky. And I want to back this up a little bit further now so that we have Pluto, even starting back here in 2015-16, Pluto already lining up even earlier than that. Let's go back a little bit further here, and we can see that Pluto first, there it is, Pluto first reached your sun, where the sun was in your chart at 13 degrees in the spring of 2014. And so this whole period of time has been a total meltdown and upheaval and transformation that's not about what happened in 2014, although it might have felt like it was in 2014. But this has been for almost a decade of you being that grape and not yet the wine, or the caterpillar that's no longer a caterpillar, but it's not yet a butterfly. And that might feel frustrating on some level, but the amount and the power of this transformation is so deep and so intense that you can use the decade in order to keep things moving along, because too much change too fast can be, life ending. It can be, it can create dis-ease. And I don't mean sickness, I mean dis-ease. So what happened? What's happening?
Well, I got married in 2012. I think 2014 was like a pretty dark time trying to like bring a business together with my ex-husband who was working, and it ended up getting divorced during my Saturn return.
Got it. So again, I'm going to put you on hold. If we were in an individual session, I'd love to hear the whole story. But Anissa said that during that period of time, there was a marriage, a new business, a divorce, and a business that was with her now ex or then ex that trying to keep it all together. And so it sounds like a lot of change. And all I can say is that I think where the change has impacted you and your feelings and who you are, that's done, but it's not done yet with how the ramifications move on through your life, which will still take another few years. So, oh joy. And so, and thank you. Let me do a stop the share here. And thank you, Anissa and Lisa and George and all of you people out there in online land, all of you people who have joined us here, but there is no here because people who are there are also here. And it's just life in the 21st century where physical reality may not be as important, or let me say, physical reality is consistently losing ground to metaphysical reality, which seems to be gaining ground during this period of time of evolution. So thank you all. I think there's probably something else I'm supposed to say. Oh yeah, don't forget, if you haven't and you'd like to, make sure to leave a donation at the cash register. I will be here next month on the first Friday of the month, which for the record will be November 3rd. And so I'll see some of you here and some of you there, whether you're here or there. We don't know which is which anymore. Hang on to your hats. I think that October is noisy. What's the technical word? It's noisy as fuck. But I don't think the noise in itself is the real game that's going on. There's stuff that's, like anyone who's a parent knows that, or has been around kids, knows that kids go through growth spurts. Nothing happens. And it seems like in a week they gain 2 inches and it's like we are at that point of latency that's confused by the fast moving inner planets. So it feels like there's a lot of growth and there's a lot of stuff going on and oh my God, and this and then there's that and I can't keep up with it. It's like the carnival thing of the plates on the sticks and I got to keep them all going. But that's not what's going on. That's where we're putting our attention to because we have to keep it together. But what's going on is the stuff that's latent, that as the planets one by one turn direct, Pluto being the first on October 2nd, and then Saturn on November, I think the 4th, and then each of the other planets on through December and January, then we're going to see the real movement from what has been the noise of these days. So it's all too much. Go to YouTube, do a YouTube run on the Beatles. It's all too much, and listen to the song that inspired my view of this month. And on top of that, like always, think cosmically, because in pushing our thoughts out as far as we can, that's how we grow. But it's of no value at all to think cosmically unless we act locally. Think cosmically, act locally. Rick Levine out. Thank you. And thank you all on YouTube land, And by the way, please go to my new homepage at Rick Levine Astrologer, one word, ricklevineastrologer.com. Sign up for the mailing list. I promise I won't send you shit you don't want. And if I do, you can always unsubscribe. That's it. Thank you all. And this meeting has ended.